Good day, everybody out there. You are tuned into a brand new podcast. We're going to call this Two Men and a Car. Um, and we're just going to talk about car stuff. A little bit of motorsport, whole lot of, road cars, supercars, race cars, electric cars, anything with some kind of engine and more than one wheel. Your two hosts, my name is David Ziff, also known as Curly.
And I'm Tom Zambino, and I would not discount motorized unicycles.
Yes, motorized unicycles would be awesome. And I guess let's just jump right into our topics. So we've got just a handful of topics today. The first one, looking at the car news from this week, is the Fiat Chrysler and potential Renault merger. The brand new Ferrari supercar, the SF90 Stradale. Talk about one of my favorite subjects, the Indianapolis 500. Even though it was a week ago, we're still going to talk about it. And Mexico, we might have more tariffs for them. And then last but not least, the Cadillac V Series. Cadillac just announced a pair of new V Series cars, and we're going to talk about them. How do they compare to the old Vs, and what do we expect from Cadillac in the future? So with that, I think let's jump into the main topic for today, which is Fiat, Chrysler, Renault, Nissan, whoever else is in that giant ball of various car companies.
Maybe Mitsubishi, maybe Ferrari, who knows?
Yeah, Maserati, Alfa Romeo. I know Renault has a couple of other brands, not just Renault. Um, that's gonna be a hell of a merger. I mean, you're gonna have. I think GM right now is they've got what 7 or 8 different brands around the world, maybe 10, give or
More
take.
than more than that, I have my backpack in a different room right now that actually does have all the brand logos on it. It used to be 10, but then they took away Vauxhall and Opel, so I think it's down to 8 now.
Yeah, so I mean, you're looking at that's about 8. I think Volkswagen is there are at least a dozen different brands. Toyota is just Toyota because they're a behemoth. But
And
if
Lexus.
yeah, it's fancy Toyota. Fine. We'll call them two. But Renault FCA, I mean, that would be another sort of giant, hodgepodge like the Volkswagen Group right now, where you've just got something from everywhere,
They would
and sometimes some of those cars overlap. That'd be a really interesting one.
they would I actually have it here that they would actually jump to the third highest production automaker in the world behind Toyota and Volkswagen. That's if it's just Renault and FCA. What of Nissan? That's the big question here.
Mm-hmm. By the way, this would mean the first time ever that Chrysler, in some way, shape, or form, is bigger than GM and Ford.
This is true. I wasn't around that. I wasn't in tune that much in the '90s. That's when they had their most successful period. So, but even
And
then,
GM
I
was
don't think.
still whooping their ass.
Yeah, exactly. And the biggest thing is they're going to be a lot more worldwide, and this makes a lot of sense in a lot of ways because FCA and Renault, the whole future is electric vehicles and autonomy. FCA has a start on autonomy with their work with Google, Waymo, and all that other branding they bought. Renault is apparently the highest selling EV manufacturer in Europe. I didn't even know that. So they're getting all
All
credit.
about that Renault Twizy. Which, by the way, I would absolutely buy one of those. So I had a fun little search through Renault's UK website because obviously I don't speak French, and a lot of their lineup is kind of bland and boring. I mean, it's a lot of sort of small cars, a lot of family cars, vans, which I guess makes a lot of sense for them. And out of all of those, like they've got a couple of hot hatches that don't really move the needle for me. But the Twizy was really interesting because it's a super tiny little car. It's all electric. I think if they sold it here, it'd be about $8,000 out the door. And the range isn't great. It was 64 miles, but for me, like even for me, and I have to commute to the country, um, that's my entire round trip. Like I could get to work and back home on almost a single charge. And you assume, of course, when I get to work, I'm going to plug it in. So, that would be an amazing little uh, commuter car to have in the US. I just found that car really interesting. And obviously, I like weird, quirky, funky cars that are sort of game changers. And I really thought this was one that really interested me.
So you're saying if they did start to bring Renault to the U.S., that's one you would buy?
Yes, and since it's got a big old electric motor in it, I could probably tow my cappuccino with it.
Good luck with that one.
Probably won't get 64 miles on the range in that, but
Yeah, the question was posed: if Renault came to the U.S., which one you'd buy? I I'd test drive a Megane RS. I don't know if it would be good enough to not buy my Golf, but it might be.
yeah, I mean, they have the Megane RS. Sometimes they have a Clio Cup. Sometimes they take a V6 and stick it in the back of a Clio. Um, every once in a while Renault goes kind of crazy, but they don't go crazy enough. Now, I guess one of the cool things that would be, I mean, I think there are a couple of cool things that could come out of this potential merger. Um, One of them would be some kind of Hemi Renault, whether it's a Clio or a Megane. I could very much see them saying, you know what, let's put a Hemi in the back of this thing, which would be kind of weird and fun, and would probably go for $100,000 immediately at Barrett Jackson. Actually, sorry, 100,000. I'm about one whole digit off, probably $1 million at Barrett Jackson. um, but sort of on a serious note, Renault has figured out how to do low production sports cars, low volume sports cars, because they have the Alpine A110, which of course you don't get in America. But the fact that they've developed this kind of low volume production line for me means they could bring back the Viper. Obviously, they'd have to re-engineer the platform, but if they re-engineered it, um, they could probably find a business case to redo that car, especially if it's already going onto a production line that works and exists. I hate to say it would probably not be a V10, which absolutely
It
tears
won't
my
be a
heart out.
V10. It won't. I can guarantee that.
Probably won't be a V10. We're just going to go with that. But just having a Viper, having a top of the line sports car, I think it would be very helpful for the Chrysler side of FCAR and whatever else, every other letter in the alphabet. But it wouldn't be like a sports car that would upset Ferrari, and it wouldn't hurt any of the other Fiat brands. Like Ferrari is obviously going to be way above whatever a Viper ends up being. It's
So
going to be way too brash to worry Maserati or Alfa Romeo.
So Ferrari is the interesting part of this situation because they're not technically part of FCA anymore, especially
Mm-hmm.
not after Sergio died. So they could very well remerge back into this giant conglomerate, but they've already separated themselves from Maserati. That was another piece of big news. Ferrari is no longer going to supply engines to them. Uh, they just all they did was hand an engine to Alpha for them to redevelop, so they'd have no ties there. Ferrari right now is still doing its own thing as a low production automaker. They still don't qualify for a lot of those emissions and fuel economy standards. So I don't know what Ferrari's going to do in this scenario. So they're probably free to make a Viper. I don't. I'm not sure if a Viper would work on the A110 platform. I don't know how. I don't know that much about that platform to be honest. But if they can do
I
a low
wouldn't
production,
say I wouldn't say it would be on the same platform, but they could use the same type of production methods. It's an aluminum chassis, so I assume it's again, I haven't looked deeply into it either. I'm not sure if it's a full unibody or if it's a like extruded bonded riveted thing like the Lotus Elise and Europa. That the fact that they have a low volume production line means that there's something there for the Viper, which the reason the Viper went away is because they could not justify that production line anymore. So the fact that you have a line and at least the start of something, you know, it gives me that little glimmer of hope that maybe we'll see another Viper again. And I guess if we had a Viper with a Dodge Demon engine in it, I guess that would be a decent substitute for a V10.
I'm not sure I want a supercharged Viper, man. Give me naturally aspirated or electric hybrid.
How
There's
about
enough.
twin turbo?
Twin turbo is better. That's better
How
than
about
a.
all right? How about twin charged then, supercharged and turbocharged? Let's
Get
just
the
throw
giant
all the
get the
blowers
giant block of metal off of the damn engine.
in.
But yeah, the biggest thing is going to be platform sharing on this thing. Is Fiat is starting to lose their grip in Europe, and Europe is not a very lucrative market anyway. So if they can have Fiats and Renaults riding on the same platform, that saves their company a lot of money. That saves kind of the Fiat brand that's kind of floundering right now. And Renault can get a foothold into the US by bringing Jeep and Dodge based SUVs to the
Yeah,
US.
the strengths of both of these companies kind of dovetail nicely. I think Renault's their biggest profit maker is their smaller cars, their hatchbacks and family cars. Fiat and Chrysler and Dodge, they've got those, but they're not really that popular. But then you look at Renault's SUV line, and it's pathetic. I think they've got one or two SUVs, but they're pretty bland and boring. So you bring in Jeep, you bring in Dodge that already has that, and of course no trucks. Now Renault does have a van line, so again these different strengths sort of work off of each other. And I think there's a Ram Sprinter or a Ram van,
Well,
but
yeah,
it's you
which are
know
technically Fiat based vans, and they haven't really updated those in a really long time. So
mhm.
if the Fiat Ram vans could suddenly be Renault based, that's probably going to save them a lot of money too.
Yeah, and again it gives them a foothold to get into the U.S. They've already got that dealer network with Fiat and Chrysler. I mean that's how Fiat really came back to the U.S. was they piggybacked off of the Chrysler dealer network. Renault can do exactly the same thing. And again, the strengths of these two companies are diametrically opposed. So you put them together, and you should have one fairly powerful car company that makes horrifically unreliable vehicles.
I
You're
mean,
talking about merging a French and Italian company and the most unreliable of the American brands. Something's got to give there.
look, man, reliabilities on Jeeps and Rams are pretty fine at this point, and Renault could probably carve itself out as a luxury brand over here, since Jeep is always going to be thought as the more hardcore brand. So, get a Renault-based Grand Cherokee, make it real pretty, real nice. It could work.
Oh, absolutely. And again, it's just that sort of merging of strengths and, as you said, the cutting of costs, the cars that are the vehicles that are weak in each brand, you can sort of um, either merge together or phase out because you have a different option.
And that cost cutting is like the biggest thing right now. FCA is kind of laughing to the bank right now compared to Ford and GM. Ford and GM was just sniping engineers one by one from FCA. And now FCA has just been slowly building over the years. They've built their reputation, they've gotten more profitable, and now they're already a lean company versus Ford and GM that are trying to get lean. Now they've done this merger to cut costs even more for the coming economy, which, I mean, there's going to be a downturn, especially for car industry here soon. Yeah, FCA is setting themselves up to dominate the American market.
Yeah, and of course you already know that Renault with Carlos Ghosn at the helm, he was the cost cutter. He brought that to Renault, he brought that to Nissan. So, you're looking at not only a car company that could have, huge volume, but they'd be very profitable and very lean, as you said, and they would be able to react to any kind of market changes, whether that is recession, whether that is a large increase in electric volume or autonomous cars. Chrysler is setting themselves up for that. Renault is trying to position themselves for all of that. And, if this merger does come to fruition, then that's going to be that could be like Volkswagen and Porsche merging and Audi about 10, 15 years ago. That same kind of, it doesn't sound like it's going to work too well. And then all of a sudden they're just steamrolling everybody.
Exactly. And the wild card here, before we transition and move on here, I'm going to ask you, since you're the Japanese car fan of this group, We've been kind of referring to Nissan, and Nissan, you probably know a little bit more about Nissan's partnership with Renault than I do. So what do you think is going to happen with Nissan here? We all know what the deal would entail if Nissan does absolutely nothing. They receive 7% of voting rights, they have a spot on the board, not a whole lot. So what do you think Nissan's going to do? Because they're going to try, because FCA and Renault are going to try and get Nissan involved here.
I think Nissan is going to look at every single business case for going separately, and then I think they're going to have to give in and just join the party. Um, I think at this point there is too much crossover between Renault and Nissan for Nissan to make a clean break. Nissan would basically have to redevelop a lot of their own structures and a lot of their own platforms. There's a lot of platform sharing between Nissan and Renault, and I don't think that Nissan. I don't think it would be viable for them to just go it on their own. If they went on their own, they would basically be the smallest Japanese car maker out there, and or I should say the smallest Japanese car company, because you have to remember that Subaru, for example, has Fuji Heavy Industries behind it. Honda is a large group. Toyota is the second or third largest car maker in the world, second largest car maker in the world right now. So for Nissan to go up against those kinds of companies with no other support, I think would just be suicide. So I think they will try to go it on their own because they want to be their own company. But I think once they lay out the business plans, there's going to be none that really give them a viable path forward without the support of Renault and therefore Chrysler and Fiat.
Well said, and that's going to be interesting. If Nissan joins the party, that is going to be one massive automaker. And quickly transitioning from a massive automaker to a very, very small automaker. Ne- Next up was the Ferrari STFU blah 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 GHXYZ90. Their new fancy supercar, which I don't particularly care about because the LaFerrari was kind of too much anyway, so I don't really care, but Curly cares, so I'm gonna let you go off on this one.
I mean, it's pretty straightforward. This is the top of the line Ferrari hypercar. And the top of the line Ferrari car, whether it was a hypercar or a supercar or whatever they called it in the day, always had a V12. Always. Every time. Enzo Ferrari himself. So here's a wonderful little story for you. In 1986, the FIA and the Formula One teams were debating the rules for Formula One. And at that time, that was during the turbo era. So they were debating, what do we want to do? Well, they wanted to get away from the turbo engines, but they wanted to go to naturally aspirated engines, and they wanted to do V8s. Well, Ferrari didn't like that. Enzo Ferrari specifically didn't like that, and he said, no, we want V12s. FIA refused to budge. So Enzo Ferrari had his team design and build an entire Indy car, chassis, engine, everything. They designed, built, developed an entire Indy car. They had the thing running. The story goes that Enzo Ferrari had the bosses of the FIA at Maranello to discuss the rules, and he was saying, we will leave Formula One if you don't give us our V12s. We are ready to go to IndyCar. And at that moment, an IndyCar V8 engine started up in the dyno cell next door just to prove how serious he was. Because that's what Ferrari is. Ferrari is V12s. Every one of their best race cars has had a V12, notwithstanding rules that have forced them to use non-V12. Ferrari is V12s. Why they're putting a V8 into this car, which sounds nothing alike, doesn't sound anywhere near as good. Just why? Put a V12 in the darn thing. I don't care that it's all-wheel drive. I don't care that it's a hybrid, but it has to have a V12. Also, it's an ugly ass car. It's just ugly as hell. And I appreciate a car that is styled based on downforce and wind resistance and speed, but Ferraris have traditionally been able to mix that with style. The LaFerrari was, I thought it was kind of borderline. It was a good looking car, but it was a little overzealous. This SFH90 Stradale, which, God, if you look up SFH90, you're going to find the Ferrari F1 car. So yeah, name it the same as an F1 car. That's smart.
It's actually called the SF90. I've just learned.
It's the SF90. The Ferrari F1 cars, the SFH90 or SF90H. It's a hybrid. They're both hybrid. They're both hybrids. Yeah, our 90th anniversary. Let's call our road car and our race car exactly the same thing. Fine, whatever. It's just, it's an ugly looking car. It doesn't have the right engine in it. You know, even the Ferrari F50 was iconic for being at least a kind of crappy top of the line Ferrari. But all of Ferrari's top of the line cars have always been iconic, whether it's the F40, the F50, the Enzo, the LaFerrari, the 265 California, going back the Ferrari Daytona, they've all been iconic with giant V12s in them. This is the first that breaks the mold, and I swear we know that zombies are not real because Enzo Ferrari has not broken out of his grave and started murdering people in Maranello.
But I think the biggest thing about this, and I don't care as much about the V12 as you do. You have a little more Ferrari history than I do, but this just doesn't feel special. It doesn't. It doesn't look special. It doesn't feel special. It was kind of announced to little fanfare. It's not like the LaFerrari. The LaFerrari, it was kind of made fun of for the name, and in the end, I think it was the worst performing of the big three hypercars. The McLaren handled better. The Porsche was all around better. The the Ferrari has kind of lost its foothold on big halo supercars. And back in the day, the F50 may not have been as fast as the McLaren F1, but it felt special. It felt just as special as the F1. The LaFerrari, it doesn't feel as special as the Enzo. It doesn't feel as special as the F50, the F40, all those other cars. So
You're
I'm sure it's going to sell out and sell for $2 million though.
Oh, absolutely. And out of whatever the 300 that they build, 275 will be stored in garages their entire life, changing hands between collectors. One will be bought by JK and he will drive it vociferously. One will probably be bought by Gordon Ramsay. He will drive it quite a lot too. And then I can't tell you what the other 23 will do, but some of those will be press cars and they'll get beaten on and tuned and tweaked and, do all the fun stuff Ferrari does to cheat their way into good magazines.
And and
Already
some will
making friends on here, by the way, by calling out for Ferrari for doing that.
and some will sell back to Ferrari and dial the mileage back.
Yeah, that'll probably happen too. Yeah, it's even easier now than ever. Yeah, I agree. It's not a special car, and again, I appreciate the hybrid system in it. By the way, stolen from Acura. I mean, it's basically the NSX drivetrain, right? Big old engine in the back with a little bitty motor to give it some extra torque, and then your electric motors up front for your all-wheel drive. That was Acura's all-wheel drive in the NSX, and okay, great. Ferrari's doing that fine. It probably won't work as well. Probably break because it's Ferrari, but yeah, you're right. There's nothing here to really write home about. The LaFerrari was a huge jump over the Enzo. There was a big gap between the LaFerrari and the Enzo. And both of those cars, I think, I know the Enzo, one of the things that made the Enzo so special was that it was tuned by Michael Schumacher when he was still winning all of his world championships. And I think the LaFerrari, I think Schumacher had some input in that too. I can't remember if he'd already had his accident, but I know that Vettel and Alonso.
I believe he did, but I think Alonso and Kimi were around back then.
Yeah, they had a lot of input on that car. And this Seattle have Sebastian Vettel, and Sebastian Vettel is a four-time Formula One world champion, but not for Ferrari. And if anything, he's been kind of a sore thumb at Ferrari the last couple of years. He's had a decent year this year, but he doesn't. I feel like the star power he holds is not the same as a Fernando Alonso, a Kimi Raikkonen, or a Michael Schumacher. So, yeah, you're right. It's not a special car. It doesn't have a V12. It doesn't look great. And I think it was Jalopnik. It was either Jalopnik or Autoweek pointed out. The older Ferrari hypercars were super hardcore. The F40, I think the carpeting was an option, and that was just the floor mats. It was bare carbon fiber inside. Same with the F50. Like, this is a full interior. It's
even the LaFerrari was basically bare carbon fiber, but but yeah, it was Jalopnik that pointed it out too. It's more of a luxury car than the others.
It's kind of like a nearly 1,000 horsepower GT car, except with a horrific trunk. Watch it actually have a functional trunk this time.
Something something golf bags. So we touched on racing, and Curly, you're a massive IndyCar fan.
Oh,
So it's braggy time because
um,
you were at the Indy 500 last week.
I was. It's not so much bragging. I just wanted to talk about the race because it was kind of a mixed bag. I actually thought it was a fairly good race. It was not a. If I was going to put it like rank it, it's not what I'd put in the top 10 of Indy 500s, but I thought it was a really good race. I think part of that comes down to the fact that Simon Pagenaud just he was untouchable. Um, he specifically said he let Joseph Newgarden go by him just so he could figure out how his car worked in the draft. And if he got passed later on, how would his car be able to handle it? Would be able to make it back up? And yeah, sure enough, he found out. Oh, I can pass anybody at will. So, you know, that was his race to lose. He had the car. The day was on his side. Just everything stacked up for Pagenaud. But the guys chasing him, Rossi, Alexander Rossi, Ed Carpenter, Takuma Sato, Will Power trying to drive his way back to the field. I mean, they put on a good show trying to catch him. And of course, the last dozen laps where Rossi and Pagenaud were just battling it out, weaving back and forth, trading passes. I mean, that the last 12 laps were amazing, even if there were about 100 or so that were just sort of a parade. But I thought it was a good race. And then Pagenaud, I know Will Power last year, the screaming on the radio, the screaming in Victory Circle was, that was pure raw emotion. But I feel like Pagenaud, this win meant more to him than a lot of the other drivers. He had a really bad year in 2018, and finally winning at Indy because he's been an oval driver. He's figured it out. He's never been a great oval driver, and I actually sort of ruled him out for a win because his luck at Indy has been awful. So the fact that everything fell into place and he just dominated the day, it was a huge boost for him. It's exactly what he needed. So he was out of the guys there who had a shot. I think he was the most. So it was fun being there. And I guess Fernando Alonso was. I think I saw his Instagram. He was out in the Spanish countryside riding mountain bikes or something.
Man, he got out there quick.
Yeah, and of course Zach Brown hightailed it back to Monaco just to at least drink in luxury as opposed to drinking alone in Indianapolis.
Yeah,
So speaking of running away to other countries, Mexico.
Oh,
Mexico. Boy. So I will try to stay out of the politics on this show.
Good idea.
But unfortunately, you can't get away from the fact that our president has announced, starting in a week and a half, he is going to tariff Mexico 5% on everything because of illegal immigration. And we're not going to talk about whether or not whether or not it's smart to put in tariffs over immigration, but we will talk about the tariffs and how they will affect your next car purchase potentially if they actually happen. So I guess the first thing I'll start off is they're saying it's going to be 5%, and then it's going to ratchet up whatever it is every couple of weeks up to 25%. The thing is, what I don't think a lot of people realize is that it's not just so if we're talking about a car, and we'll stick to cars here. But if you're talking about a car, it's not just okay. My Ford Focus, which I guess you won't be able to buy in a year, but my current small SUV or small car that's built in Mexico. Okay, the cost of that is going to go up by 5%. Well, that's not strictly true because the way that NAFTA has worked is that various bits of your supply chain are currently in Mexico. So I'll give you an example that I've worked on, which is a transmission controller. So that controller, the first piece of it is a terminal pin, little stamped piece of metal, just transmits an electrical signal. That's made in the United States. That then gets shipped to Mexico, where it gets molded into a electrical connector. Then that connector comes back to the United States, so there it gets a 5% tariff tacked onto it. We take that electrical connector, we put it into a transmission controller in the United States. Then that controller gets shipped to Mexico, where it gets put into some small crossover SUV or small car, depending on the car company. Then that car gets sold in the United States, which means gets shipped back. So that's an additional 5%. What you have to remember is that every time a component goes from company to company, it's getting a profit markup. So if that terminal cost 1 penny when it started out, by the time it gets to the vehicle, it's going to cost pretty close to 2 cents. It's almost going to double in price. And that's notwithstanding the tariff. So really that 5% tariff, if you're looking at car components, by the time it reaches the end customer, it's probably going to be more like 15%. And that's not even including the fact that Mexico might very well put their own 5% tariffs on this, which doubles everything. So really, the cost of a car made in Mexico could go up by as much as 30%. And, again, that depends on how the tariffs work out. It depends on how close to the brink we actually run this. But that would be pretty catastrophic to the small car industry. And you know what's going to happen? If we do end up going with that tariff, the best way to get around that sort of insane markup as parts go back and forth is you just move your supply chain fully to Mexico. The controller that we make, if we just, that production line could be built anywhere. And I bet what my corporate gods would do is just say, all right, we're going to move that line to our plant in Mexico and call it a day. Okay, the tariff gets paid when the car goes into the United States, but that's not our problem. Yeah, especially if it does go to the 25%, because at that point, because again, you have to remember that's just one component, and in just the transmission controller, we've got 150 individual components, or 150 unique components. So if even half of those are being somehow coming through Mexico, it's going to make more sense for us to move that entire line to Mexico than it is for us to try to fight the tariffs. And I'm sure you know more than me how much that's going to affect the entire price of the car.
I think it's going to actually affect even more than the price of the car when it comes to the OEMs, because like you said, you're going to lose production for parts in America to try and just move things straight to Mexico. But there are also car companies, a lot of the German automakers, BMW, Mercedes, Audi, they build cars in America so they can ship them out to other countries. Now, all these other countries are going to start having retaliatory taxes or retaliatory tariffs to counter us. And if they keep having tariffs shipping things out of America now, that's going to be a problem. Because if you're
or shipping in,
exactly,
because a lot of your components are going to come from China or Mexico or Germany or the UK.
Yep.
Yeah, so I think BMW is about ready to open a 3 Series plant in Mexico. Would it make more sense for them to, if this tariff comes up, is it going to make more sense for them to continue to build 3 Series in the United States and then have to fight tariffs on them? Or are they just going to move all the production down to the plant that's already tooled up for it?
Yeah, I don't know what they're going to do, and it's also the issue of there are a lot of cars that are built in Mexico because that's the only way they could get some margin, like you said. Small cars, the Ford Focus was built there. Everything but the Golf R is built in Mexico, and so are a couple other Volkswagen vehicles. If it's easier for them to get those get those components over back to Germany, they're going to do it. So Mexico loses out big time there, and Volkswagen will start pulling vehicles out of America. They might close some of the plants. The Chevy Blazer, um, that's going to get hit pretty hard. That's a little awkward for GM. I hear there's a plant in Ohio that's open for it though, and I think
That's where
a
they're going
lot
to
of
build the solid axle version, right?
sure, you keep believing that. But but the biggest thing for American companies is a lot of them aren't going to want to raise the price of cars, and you know where they're going to look to save some money if they don't raise the price of cars? They're going to lay off people, more people.
Yep.
Whether it's at plants, whether it's white collar, and it's guess what, kids? It's not going to be management.
It's going to be top to bottom, and again, if a lot of this production ends up moving to Mexico because of the tariff, because it's cheaper to make a car or a vehicle in Mexico, and then ship it worldwide, because it's not like aside from a handful of vehicles, a lot of vehicles are now built on a global platform. So, you build your 3 Series or your Focus or whatever in one plant somewhere in the world and then ship those cars all around the world to wherever they go because it's just cheaper to have a single production line, a single location, and deal with the various, shipping and tariffs and things like that. And if the option is, okay, some of our cars are going to get a tariff when they go in the United States, but most of them are not going to get a tariff because they're leaving Mexico, which is not tariffing the hell out of everybody. You're just going to move your cars to Mexico. And again, that's going to be layoffs. That is going to be plant closures. That is going to be blue collar jobs lost. And that whole, Mexicans are coming to take your job will actually happen for real. Like that's just what's going to happen. You know, any company, they're going to go with what's cheapest. And if what's cheapest is, all right, we're going to move more of our production to the country that's not tariffing goods and has cheaper labor, they're going to do it. So this is not going to work. I genuinely hope it doesn't happen because it's going to be such a cluster. I talked to our purchasing group, and every single time, because I've seen this for the last 3 years or 2 years, every single time there's a tariff threat, their phones and emails blow up because every single one of their suppliers and customers is going, hey, how is this going to affect us? And it has. I mean, the steel tariffs and the aluminum tariffs have already affected our business. And, you know, it's just it's such a mess. And again, companies want cost, they want stability. And if the stability is not in the United States, they're gonna go elsewhere, even if they're an American company.
Yeah, and if they're not willing to ship parts from Mexico into the United States, like you said, there's going to be plant closures in the United States. Plants or OEMs and suppliers are going to start pulling some of their development out of the United States if they don't see it cost effective to ship things from Mexico into the United States. And there's like the easy argument is, oh, just do the things in the United States. Well, it's never that easy because you have to make the facilities, you have to train the people, you have to hire the people, and that's not instant. But these tariffs are. So they're going to follow the path of least resistance, and if that means taking jobs away from North America, they're gonna.
Yeah, and it's not like if the tariffs go away, they're gonna move the jobs back. Once they're there, they are there. So these will be fairly permanent job loss, unless there's um, uh, companies follow Newtonian physics. Every action has an equal and opposite reaction. So if there's no follow-up action to get those companies to move their jobs back, they're not going to. They're going to say, okay, well, we already made the investment to move this line down here, move this production down here. There's no reason to move it back because we're saving money.
Yeah, and it all goes back to a bigger issue. If you want everything to be built in the United States, it's not going to happen. That's why we have trade agreements with Mexico and Canada to have sort of a unified economy in North America. We're three countries that, in terms of trade, function as one. So if you attack Mexico, you're attacking yourself. Things are going to cost more money, and that's bad for the consumer. We're we're pushing ourselves into, or we're trying to. We're not going to get too much into politics, but we keep pushing ourselves away from Mexico and Canada, and that's not good for us.
No, it's not. And the same thing is happening in the UK. With Brexit. Brexit hasn't even happened yet, and I think they said that in the last years, the negotiations have been going on. Car production in the United Kingdom, which used to be one of the biggest, I think it was the biggest car producing country outside of Germany in Europe. Their production has dropped 40% in the last year just on the threat of Brexit for the exact same reason that we think there's going to be a major trickle down impact in the United States if there's a Mexico tariff because companies are they're risk averse. They're going to take the path of least resistance and they need to make profit. And if the whatever the direction is, whether it's economic or political, the direction is we need to move out of this country because it's not providing the stability and the profit margins we need, they will do it.
Yep.
You cannot put the genie back in the bottle. Globalism is here. It's got its ups and its downs, but you can't just turn back the clock. And that's what we're trying to do, both in the United States and the UK, and it's just not going to work.
And you can't
I
just
look forward to all of the comments in this video when we're done.
and you, like I referred to before, you can't just throw this down instantly. I know we did with the steel, and we're trying to with the Germany tariffs, or the China tariffs, and guess what? It's not working. Companies have to pivot. They have to raise prices. You can't just throw these tariffs out there immediately. You have to give time for them to properly react, or they're going to react in the way you don't want, which is exactly what's happening. And just from a personal standpoint, like I mentioned, Volkswagen builds the Golf all the way through the GTI in Mexico. They build the Touareg or whatever they call that thing in Mexico. They build a lot of their SUVs. Now, they've already kind of hinted at pulling the regular Golfs out of the US because of, well, lack of sales. But if tariffs start going up on the GTI, are they going to keep building the GTI around here? Or are they just going to pull that out, take it back to Germany, and maybe not even import it because maybe they're not going to get the margin over it? We're going to lose another great small car in this country because of it, and there's going to be nothing to replace it because guess what? Americans have already pulled out of the small car market too because they couldn't compete. So we're going to lose a whole segment of, we're going to lose a big seller in America, especially around here on the East Coast. That's companies are going to
Yeah,
start taking cars away.
you guys are just gonna have to buy Honda Civic Sports,
Oh
Civic
boy,
Sports SIs, Type R's. Gonna have
are
to
those
get that VTAC, yo.
are those built in America?
They are. They're built in
Oh,
Ohio.
good for them.
Mm-hmm.
I think we've
So,
talked the crap out of that.
yeah. Yeah, plus, it's just a depressing topic in general. Just the thought of how that's going to ripple down, what kind of cars it's going to kill, and just the whole we're trying to shoot Mexico in the foot, but the problem is their foot is standing on top of ours. So let's go on to another interesting topic. The Cadillac V's, and Tom, you know a whole lot more about these than I do, so I'm going to let you just sort of take the lead on this one. I think I've
Well,
talked enough in this segment.
well, I kind of know a little bit more about these than I can really say right now, so I'll just leave that
You
to.
don't work for them anymore. Just go ahead and say it. Get some breaking news on this show, man. Come on.
Well, let's just say I can't wait to hear the reviews on these vehicles and when they first come out.
Okay,
So
so without getting into too much detail, do you think the reviews are going to be positive or negative or neutral?
sit in the back seat.
Okay.
So so the way Cadillac has been running the V Series the past few years, they started with just this crazy CTSV. They stuck a I think an LS3 in there or something. They just stuck a crazy Corvette engine in there, detuned it a bit, and they had some fun. It started
And
out,
they went racing.
and then they went
They
racing
went
with it.
racing, which and I just want to briefly say this is why this is my favorite of the CTSVs because they went World Challenge racing back when World Challenge was still full um, steel body, production based cars. It was basically took a body on white, threw a roll cage in it, very basic aero and suspension, and you went racing. And the CTSV just kicked all the ass and had an amazing livery. And I think the second gen it was still a steel body car, but I know the latest ones now are all carbon fiber bodies. They're a lot like GTE cars, and that makes me sad. So first gen CTSV is awesome. I know that I've driven a second gen CTSV and it's a wonderful car to drive, but if I was going to buy one, I'd still buy the first gen car.
And you could
And
probably
not
get one
just
for a
because
good
they're
price at
cheaper.
this point. Yeah. But
See,
yeah,
that's a car that's screaming for an LS7 swap.
every car is screaming for an LS7 swap.
Yeah, but that one in particular because it's just CTS double V or something like that. That'd just be fun.
CTS V7. Anyway, so they built up from that, and eventually they kind of perfected it with the Alpha platform, which was widely regarded. It drove and handled as good as or better than its German hot
To
sedan
to
competitors.
fill people in, the Alpha platform is the chassis, suspension, drivetrain layout. It's the backbone of GM's rear wheel drive cars right now, which includes the CTS, ATS, or now the C4 and C5, and the Camaro.
Yes, well, Alpha 1 is the CTS, ATS, and the Camaro. So these new V series are the Alpha 2, so it's the next evolution in the chassis and suspension tuning. The Alpha 1, again, was one of the most highly regarded chassis in the sports sedan market. And they started with the V series. They pumped it up. They gave the twin turbo V6 to the ATS, somewhere in the realm of 400 something horsepower, and they took the LT4 from the Corvette Z06, cranking almost, I think it was 640 in the CTS-V. So these were two insane cars, and after which they created what was called the V Sport line, kind of like how BMW has the M cars and then the M Sport cars. The V Sport were more tame. They looked a lot more like the normal CTS and ATS instead of all the carbon fiber bits. They had less power, less hardcore tuning, less hardcore tires, and it seems that that's what they're doing with the V series. Now, it's not clear because Cadillac has not been clear about things in the past few years. That's a thing that really bothers me because everyone is jumping on them for replacing those hardcore V series with Vs, and they're now teasing a more hardcore V series with they ran at Detroit yesterday. They ran a couple mules, which stop doing this. Stop stop running these unnamed camoed prototypes. Stop running them through tracks. They did it with the mid-engine Corvette at Corvette Fest or whatever they called that. Stop doing these drive-bys because it's stupid. We already took the pictures anyway. Everybody took the pictures of the mules. We don't need this anymore. Just say you're going to come out with a more hardcore V, because right now people are going to start jumping on you because you take these big hardcore ATS and CTS Vs and then you show up with a V that's underwhelming. It looks like the normal CT4 and CT5, cranked up the power a little bit. They only gave a 4-cylinder to the CT4 and I think a turbo 6 for the CT5. Neither
Twin
of
turbo
which,
V6 even.
ooh, the good old
MC.
the good old German super detuned twin turbo V6. Yeah, that'll get everybody's blood pumping. You'll take away the manual, which was one of the more popular specs on the ATS-V. They took that away, and they're giving validation to every single person in the previous generation that replaced their V Sport badges with Vs, because just like with M cars, that happened because people are idiots.
At least they didn't put a TRD badge on them or a Nismo badge, because that's, my favorite cars are all Japanese imports. God, that's a thing where you take the wrong manufacturer tuning arm badge and put it on the wrong car. And actually, at college, I once saw, I think it was a Mustang, like an SN195, that had just all of them. It had Nismo and TRD and Mugen stickers all over it. And I thought that was just.
See
There's
that
actually a couple things I like about the CT4, CT5. The first thing is the steering wheel. It's got the rev counter lights in it, like a Formula One steering wheel. That's cool. I want that on more cars.
that is something that needs to show up a lot more. Ford did it a few years ago with the Shelby GT350s, and it's really neat. And I do like that, but they're in automatic cars, dude.
Oh, lame. But I just want that steering wheel to show up in more cars. That would be like, to me, that's something. Why is that not in the Civic Type R? Because that car is super over the top. Or the Focus RS. That would have been another perfect car for it. Your GTI, or I'm sorry, your Golf R is too adult
Grown
for
up.
that. So yeah, too grown up. too mature. But the juvenile, super racy, Fast and the Furious inspired cars, those need rev lights in the steering. And
But they
Mugen and Roush and whoever else is listening out there, please make that an optional part. I would buy a Civic Type R just so I can put that steering wheel on it.
And then we talk grown up, but then they put this steering wheel on these grown up businessman looking V Sports parading as V Series. And their Cadillac, stop changing your naming convention. We're just getting used to it now. We just got used to the whole V Sport V thing. Yeah, we get that you changed it to CT4, CT5, CT6. That's fine. Because you're
no, I'm going to say no, it's not okay. Because so what Cadillac has been trying to do for the last 20 years is try to emulate the Germans. They're trying to make, sporty, kind of fast luxury. They're basically trying to be BMW. That worked for Jaguar, but it's not going to work for everybody. And if you I actually went and did this. I looked at the sales figures for Cadillac. They have not changed at all.
They're ugly. They're real ugly.
Well, since 2005, their sales, I mean, there's been some up and down, but you can attribute a lot of that to the economy. Like there was a dip during the recession, fine. But I think they sold within a couple hundred the same number of cars last year as they did in 2004. So 14 years, sales have not increased. Clearly, the direction they're going is not working. What I think anybody, whether it's Cadillac or Lincoln or just some car maker out there, and I think the Americans are perfect for it, some luxury car maker needs to make a cool luxury car. And actually, I take that back. There's one car company out there that makes a reasonably priced, and we're talking luxury cars, reasonably priced, very cool car that you want to be seen in, and that is Toyota, and it's the Toyota Crown. Because it's not a car that goes fast. It is a car that is meant to be comfortable and luxurious and very, very cool. And whenever you think of Cadillac, you don't think of, you can think of a CTSV or an ATSV, but I think what most people think of is, Boss Hogg's Eldorado, that kind of car. Because, that was a slow land yacht, but when he drove up in that thing, he just oozed presence. And Boss Hogg, if you remember the original Dukes of Hazzard, not the movie one with Burt Reynolds, but the original Dukes of Hazzard, Boss Hogg was a fat redneck slob. But when he pulled up in his Cadillac with the bullhorns on the front, he was cool. That's what Cadillac should be doing. Make cool luxury cars that are reasonably priced and just, you don't show up fast, but you just arrive.
And it's interesting you say that because it's not with cars, but I think Jalopnik and others have pointed this out. Lincoln has done this almost perfectly right now, not with cars, but with their SUV lines. They come out with really, really good looking cars with really, really good looking interiors that drive really well and don't have stupid German names. They have cool names like the Navigator, which was a carryover, the Aviator, the Nautilus.
That's the other thing I hate is this. I've never liked alphabet soup names. I genuinely, this is one of the biggest things I dislike about German cars is that they are all alphabet soup. Like I swear sometimes when they're creating these names, it's just a marketing dude slamming his face onto the keyboard because it never make like to me, it never makes any sense. You need I shouldn't need a translation guide to understand what kind of car I am. So I don't like the alphanumeric names. I really hate the Cadillac has taken that on, especially because they did have some really cool names. They had a lot of clunkers, but they also had some really cool ones. I mean, if there was an Eldorado, if Cadillac came out with a new Eldorado, really cool one with a nice lumpy smooth V8, and it shouldn't be a land, but basically think of like a what?
Scala.
Yeah. But like, basically what I want to see them do is like a Rolls Royce, but at a third the price. Because Rolls Royces are super cool, but they're also crazy expensive. So, something that when you roll up in a Cadillac, you should look like you're rolling up in a Rolls Royce, but people know that you've got a gun hidden somewhere on you. Like that's what Cadillac should be making. Because again, this idea of going after the Germans just isn't working. They're not pretentious enough to be BMWs or to attract BMW. They're not, um, they're not sort of monocle enough for Jag owners. They're not super high tech like a Mercedes, and they're not quirky like like a Saab used to be. So there's nothing really that makes them stand out other than okay, they're American.
So, and that's a good point because that's always been the issue, even all the way up to the V Series. They're challenging a market that's filled with the M3, the M5, the RS6, all those other big German cars, and I won't comment on how they're designed or specs or everything, but when they come out as a finished product, they're just not better.
I'll
They
comment on
just
the design. It involves a lot of Budweiser, doesn't it?
no comment. There,
No,
there
that's
tends
right. You're too good for the Budweiser. Dogfish head then.
there there tends to be this feeling with Cadillacs when they come out that they're the budget, the low cost version of the bang for your buck version of all the German cars, and I think Hyundai has really carved out that niche with the Genesis series, but Cadillac, they don't differentiate themselves enough. They really feel like a discount version of the Germans, whereas someone like Genesis, they feel like a lot of bang for your buck. Whereas if you buy a Cadillac, even if you buy the top of the line CTS or I did- we'll see how the CT5 does, you feel like you're getting a discount version of the 5 Series. And that's always the biggest issue because when you pay $50,000 for a car, which is what a lot of those cost when they're new, why not just go spend the 60 grand on the German car that has a nicer interior, that rides better? Or you could save your money, go buy a Genesis or a Lexus or an Acura, which feel like premium vehicles at a discounted price instead of just literally a discount German car.
Or if you're really weird, you can go out and buy an Infinity.
Ew.
You're right. I mean, there's nothing that really makes them stand out. They're trying to go after this performance luxury sedan market, but that market is, in my opinion, overly crowded. All the German makers have, or there's multiple German makers who do that. You got Audi, Mercedes, and BMW. Um, Jaguar is in that mix. Cadillac has put themselves in there. Lexus is starting to put themselves in there.
But they
With
stand out.
yeah, I mean, yeah, it stands out with mixed results. But again, when you're trying to break into a market, you have to stand out, whether good or bad. Um, but yeah, I mean, it's just an overly crowded market right now. Oh, Alfa Romeo, got to throw them in there too, and
Stands
you
out
could
with
even
lots of
throw
flair.
yeah, yeah, and lots of tow truck trips. But again, they're standing out as you said, and Cadillac really isn't. They're just, to be honest, it's a lot like the rest of GM. It's kind of middle of the road, and they'll create one quick headline with unveiling the cars, but then the cars come out and they're just sort of yeah.
Like that's those cars, the V Sports, they're well, whatever they like to call their lines now, they're just gonna blend in.
Yeah, and of course you look at the CT4 and the CT5, and I swear if you took the badges off them, you'd have no idea which is which. I mean, that's to me, that's just a general car styling trend that I really, really hate. I hate how let's make one car and just make it bigger and smaller. Like it worked for BMW, but I quite like having my cars unique. Like, I want someone to know that I bought this model over that model.
It's I don't get it. And really with these two cars, if you look at the dimensional specs, the CT4 is not all that much smaller and the CT5 is smaller than the CTS for some reason. I don't know why they decided to move it around like this. Uh, because small cars already are not a lucrative market, so they made them smaller. What are they doing here? What do they want with these new vehicles? They're building off of a platform that was not selling very well, that did not stand out very well. And sure, it looks a lot like the CT6, so now you just look like you have a smaller CT6. I don't get this. I don't get the pivot from their naming convention. It's fine if you wanted to line it up with the CT6, fine. I get your logic there. But why pivot from your performance model naming conventions when we were just getting used to it? I don't get it.
And this is why GM is sliding further and further down the totem pole of big automakers. It's kind of hard to believe that 20 years ago, GM was the biggest automaker in the world, period. And in the last 20 years, they're now down to third behind Volkswagen and Toyota, and potentially Fiat, Chrysler, Renault, Nissan. I had to think for a minute and remember all those names. But the Fiat Renault group, if that does come to fruition, that's going to push GM out of the podium position, which, it sounds like they understand that's an issue, but because obviously they just had a huge round of layoffs and they're dumping a bunch of models. But I kind of wonder if so I think they understand there's an issue, and it's really across all of their brands, whether it's Chevrolet or Cadillac or GMC or sort of all the others. I think they understand that they are losing ground to their competitors, but I don't think they know what to do to really get that ground back. I think it was Richard Petty said, you can't find your way home if you don't know how you got lost, or something along those lines. Like, okay, it's one thing to recognize that you've got an issue. It's another to understand how you got there and how you're going to get yourself out of it. And I don't really see GM having a plan to turn around all of their brands. They're just continuously shrinking. And at some point, you're going to shrink yourself out of existence. And it's not like come 2021, GM's going to go bankrupt again and they're going to have all their bits sold off. But, their current business strategy, at some point, that's what's going to happen, is they're going to shrink and just disappear.
Yeah, you hit the nail on the head. I don't they banked a lot on China in the past few years, and now China's economy is slipping. They're banking a lot on autonomous and EV, and they better make a splash with any new EV they put out, because all their gas engine vehicles, they're coming out to very, very warm reception. They're getting reviewed with very warm reception. That's why their truck is falling dead last to a truck that wasn't even updated in the past few years. They've fallen to last place in their biggest moneymaker. They better they better make some headway in the EV market, or they're going to start slipping. They're already average in most every segment. They're starting to lose sales. They really need to make a splash.
And as Lee Iacocca once said, you can't Lee Iacocca? No, Bob Lutz. One of those two. I think it was Bob Lutz. It was Bob Lutz. That's right. It was Bob Lutz. You can't make headway in the auto industry by being middle of the road. You may alienate some customers by taking risks, but you will usually, if you take the right risks, you will usually gain more than you lose. And in his case, it was the Ford Taurus, way back in 1989 or whenever. That when the first Ford Taurus came out, it made a huge splash. And yeah, it alienated a lot of Ford buyers, but it also gained them far more new customers than it did those who stepped away. And the reason I confused the two managers is because Bob Lutz was telling the story to Lee Iacocca, who couldn't understand why his K cars were continuously slipping. Well, everyone's happy with them. We get great reviews. Everyone gives us 5s or 6s out of 10s. Yeah, well, the Taurus got a bunch of 8s and it got a bunch of 2s, and we average out the same. But the fact that people had this love-hate relationship with our car meant that they were paying attention to it, and that brought people into the showrooms. And it's great that GM has got this really kick-ass supercar coming out. But if you're not doing that with the rest of your cars, then it's not going to work. And by the way, if you want to talk about really poor design language, whatever they're doing with the Chevy cars, I mean, I know there's been a whole lot of digital ink spilled about how ugly the new Camaro's face is, the new Silverado's face is. The problem isn't that they're ugly on their own; it's that they have the same face on two different cars. Like, it's that same, boxy styling language, and it doesn't work on one of them, much less either of them. And it seems to be spreading like a cancer to the rest of the lineup, and it's just going to be worse and worse. I don't know who styled those cars, but I hope they got laid off.
No, again, no comment. But
We will have no
close.
styling department from here on out.
I'll close out with this. I think GM really needs to take notes from FCA. FCA, with this merger from Renault, with notwithstanding, they came in under the Fiat management. They came out and they decided we're going to carve out our niche. We're going to build some cool cars that look nice, that get really good reviews. Yeah, they may not be the most reliable on the road, but guess what? They're still going to be perfectly reliable for most people, and most people have responded to that. They're good-looking vehicles. They're they come out with flashy colors. They come out and they beat a lot of more expensive cars in comparison tests, and they ooze cool right now.
Oh
GM
yeah.
GM is not cool at all right now, and the warm to cool reception for the V Series is indicative of that. And they really need to turn the perception around, and I don't know if they're going to do it.
Yeah, I mean that's a really great comparison because if you think about the cars that have come out in the last 5 years, I mean, how many of FCA's cars have come out with huge fanfare and awesome reviews, and subsequently really good sales? I mean, the Wrangler JL, the Gladiator, the Alfa Romeo, can't remember the name.
Stelvio,
Well, yeah, Stelvio, their
Julia,
sedan, the Quattro Figlio.
Julia.
Yeah, that's right, the Giulia Quattro something or other. Um, yeah, the Jeep Renegade even can go in there. They've had a bunch of hits and or Grand Cherokee and Cherokee,
Yeah,
another pair that have really come out and found their home and have sold very well. Whereas GM comes out with, I think the last car that had any kind of fanfare. I mean, it was the. I'm actually trying to think. When did they last update the Escalade? Was that recently? I
even
can't see.
even
That's
even
actually how
that
bad
was
it
a
is.
bluff.
I was gonna say that's how bad it was. I can't even remember. When a new Escalade came out, that used to be the benchmark for a big luxury SUV. And I can't even remember the last time an Escalade came out. Like that's sort of where they're at right now. And that's pretty. To be honest, that should have been the red flag right there. Is okay, we came out with a new Escalade and nobody gave a crap.
Yep, nobody gave a crap. Story of GM right now.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I think as we both know, I think there's people are going to love the mid-engine Corvette for what it is, but they're going to find a lot to dislike about it too, especially when it comes to what it's. I'll just be honest, what it's going to cost. I don't know for
Big
sure.
question.
I just know it's going to be not what you think.
Probably. I haven't actually seen the prices, so I genuinely don't know.
I don't think GM has seen the prices. They're just going to figure. They're probably going to figure it out as they go. What can we charge for this thing?
So that's been the news for the week, Curly.
That has been the news for the week. So I guess we should probably properly introduce ourselves. Like, who are these two assholes here? Because we didn't do this at the top of the show. We kind of just dove into it. Who are we? What are we doing? Why do we have any qualifications to sit in front of a pair of microphones and talk cars?
Well, if you're watching this on video, I'll just tell the folks on audio. I'm currently wearing a Viper shirt right now. I used to work at FCA back when the Viper was actually a thing. I worked at GM after that, which is why I'm trying to keep so quiet about things.
By the way,
This
this is the sign of a good employee. He got laid off from GM, and he's still keeping their secrets. If it was me, I'd be like, "Get me onto Auto Week. Get me on a Motor Trend. I got dirt to spill." Yeah, Tom, you worked for FCA for how long?
2 years at FCA, 2 years at GM, so
Mm-hmm.
4 years at two of the major OEMs. And I've heard a lot about how Ford does things. My roommate worked for Ford, and a good friend of mine at GM worked for Ford. So I've seen a lot of the OEM side. And you, Curly, you are on the supplier side.
Yes, I was going to say to finish off. What do you do now?
Oh, I'm currently out in the fabrics division at Gore. So
It's no
complete
longer
pivot.
in automotive, but you do still. And I'm number one. You still have the connections for the automotive industry, but also you get a very interesting perspective because I think some of your. Well, actually, I know for a fact that there are not necessarily in the fabrics division, but I know there are a lot of Gore materials that do get used in automotive. And actually, for me specifically, we are we're trying to do business with your electronics department because you guys sell some things that we need for for the future of automotive. We're working on an autonomous vehicle controller that's going to use Gore components, hopefully. There's some commercial aspects that we have to work out there. But anyways, as far as me, I've only had one job in the last 5 years, and I'm a design engineer at Hitachi Automotive, Hitachi Automotive Systems America. Use the full name. Winners of the Detroit Grand Prix yesterday. Yay, Hitachi. And I work specifically in the driveline control division packaging group. So all of your ECUs, TCUs, all-wheel drive, traction control, all the things, all the electronics that run in your car have to have some kind of box to keep them alive in your car. And I design all those boxes. So depending on the project, I'm either a tier 1 or a tier 2, which means I either deliver directly to the OEM or deliver to another supplier that delivers to the OEM. And because of that, I sort of get to see the entire food chain of the automotive. So that's why I had that example of the TCU, because that is a real product that is going to have a real impact by these tariffs. So that's sort of what I see. And I get to see the slice of the pie from various automotive OEMs because we work with a bunch of them.
Yeah, and I got to see a lot of the early design work. I got to see a lot of why decisions got made, and I could understand from one time or another, but I can also see a lot of negatives, like the Cadillacs.
Mm-hmm. So I guess to really finish this off, the opinions expressed on this podcast are the views only of the two people on the podcast. Do not represent the views of our employers, both current and previous.
Agreed.
That's the legal stuff out of the way. So thank you everybody for tuning in. Please like, subscribe, comment. We would like to hear feedback. This is obviously a very new show, and we want to improve it and get some fans out there. So thank you for watching, and we'll see you again in a week or so.
Yep. Thanks for watching and listening, and hope to see you next time.